Hello, I'm George Middleton, your host this evening on this podcast episode of Black Space Live. The topic for our discussion today, we're going to examine what is critical race theory, what it is, and what it is not. I'd like to take some time briefly to encourage you, before we get into the show, to like, subscribe, and share this podcast. In other words, don't be selfish with this content. Share the love. So before we start the discussion, I want to introduce our panelists for the rest of the evening, and I'm going to let him give you just a little bit of what he thinks you should know about him. Go ahead, Mojo.
My name is William Muldrow. Go by Mojo is a familiar moniker. I have a background in a little bit of everything: computer science, physics, and I have a love of history and philosophy. And I'm published in actually several fields, including social sciences, some history, physics, biology. So I'm a lover of knowledge and all things that expand the mind. So I hope I can bring some perspective to this topic as well as those in the future.
Well, welcome, Mojo. And it's always great to see you because you're very lively, you're very intelligent. And you have a very unique way of delivering your message. So it's always an experience and always an enjoyable one at that.
Likewise, brother.
My brother. So yeah, today we're going to kind of have a more frank discussion about critical race theory. The mania on what it is and what it is not just won't go away. And due to a largely partisan ideology driven conspiratorial-based agenda, an important issue, an important concept has been hijacked to a large disadvantage to really the country, because it has set off a domino effect of misleading, misinformation, and banning books that aren't even relevant to the concept of CRT, but more relevant to the actual history of our country. So what you have here to my side is kind of a improvised version of a PowerPoint, because I haven't learned how to do the technical aspect of it yet for this new platform. So it's a learning curve I gotta catch myself up to. But for now, this is the best we got. This is a PowerPoint presentation of what I did for an organization, and it's titled, "What is Critical Race Theory and how does it impact business?" So we won't talk really about the business portion of it, but we will kind of get into the topic of just the facts. And we're just going to take our time. If we don't get through it all tonight, that's okay. Quality is better than quantity. So before I start this PowerPoint piece, Mojo, give me your take on this confusion, this mania, the politics, the race ideology, all of that. What's your take on it, just from a social scientist perspective?
Well, for one thing, I found it interesting that they would even bring up critical race theory, because I mean it's kind of a vague reference even for people that study racism and study sociology and study law. It's very rare that you will ever have this in any type of curriculum. It's never been taught in any secondary school ever. All right, period. So let's get that out of the way. It's not history. They want to make it synonymous with Black history, which is actually, that would be insulting, because if you said it was Black history, what it is it's analyzing law and policy and social things from the perspective of the looking glass of racism, and accepting that racism has been a part of the United States society. Actually, that's the very first tenet of critical race theory, is that race is arbitrary. It's not a biological thing as much as it is a social construct. And then the second thing is that it is pervasive throughout everything in the United States. And then you apply it to law and into events and policy. So this is not something that was ever taught in history class, because it's not history. It's a way of viewing history and taking history and then going back and applying it to laws and say, how did race affect how this law was passed and how this policy was implemented and how these rules were set forth, and looking at them from the perspective of race, but it's not history. So it sounds scary. So it sounded scary enough that once it energized the base, and they said, "Ooh, that doesn't sound right." And actually, if they really knew what it was, they probably would be more scared, because the first part of it before you go into the other four tenets is accepting that racism does exist, that it is pervasive, and it has affected all these aspects of life. They're not willing to do that. So yeah, I can see why they're scared of it. But at first, the thing that struck me is I was thinking that they absolutely had no idea what critical race theory was, which if you listen to them talk, they don't, because they won't ever give you an idea of what it is. But then when you look at the laws that they pass, because see, if they banned critical race theory, it absolutely was, like I said, so something that's not taught in school, you have affected nothing. It was a moot law. But what the laws see, like in Florida, they have a list of books and that include Frederick Douglass, the bio of Frederick Douglass, which include Susan B. Anthony, and not because of feminists. It specifically says because she was anti-slavery and an abolitionist, and just that component. They picked out specific things that they could ban, and then they labeled it as, we're banning critical race theory. No, you're burning books. You're blaming critical race theory, which isn't taught, and you're energizing your base with a very scary word that they're not going to research and find out what it really meant anyway.
Exactly. So you hit the nail on the head as it pertains to how they have conflated the actual history of race with this concept of the study of the impact of race. So reverting to this makeshift PowerPoint that I put together here, it was my attempt to kind of reverse engineer the process. The first goal being to get people to be able to associate the differences between the two. So in my presentation, I start with the first question. Question number one: what is critical race theory? The $1 million question. In my presentation, before I get to answer directly what critical race theory is, I asked the participants, what is race? And what is so interesting in 2022, you can ask anyone, you can get 10 to 15 people in the room, varying levels of intelligence, of education, socioeconomic status. And you'll get just as many different answers to the question, what is race? The average person today believes that race, and which you've alluded to this already in discussing the tenets of critical race theory, that race is biological, that race is genetic, scientifically valid. It's just part of the human condition. And a lot of times many times those who want to maintain the status quo of white supremacy will throw the conversation off by saying, "Well, everybody's tribal. Everybody's just natural. Everybody's tribal," and I have to stop them in their shoes and say, "Wait a minute. Race is nothing to do with tribes. Race is an ideology. Tribe is culture. They're nothing to do with each other." So, I'll in my presentation, I'll take some time to have people like give me what their definitions of race are, and I respect all their answers. And then I go to the next slide, which breaks it down, and it's titled "Creating Race: The Origins of an Ideology." Racial classification systems were developed as Europeans explored and colonized the globe and found that there were physical differences between people. These systems were used to justify colonization, conversion. I think we lost Mojo. Hopefully he'll be back. I'll keep going. And even slavery and genocide. I think we got him back. You there, big dog?
Yeah.
All right. These systems were used to justify colonization, conversion, slavery, and genocide. According to these systems, white skin was the standard, and dark skin was associated with intellectual inferiority and slowed development. That is race. It's not genetic. It's not valid. As you said, Mojo, it's a social construct created by the European in the 1600s to justify to his community the transatlantic slave trade. That's what race is. And this really, for those participants in my presentations who identify as white, this really kind of throws them back, because they're trying to process their identity as white as a racial classification, when most people who identify as white don't see that white identity as a race. They only see the black identity as a race. And so it's added another layer of confusion and ignorance for the white identity, because they're really seeing critical race theory aimed only as a black thing. And because they don't see themselves as a race, they see themselves just as human beings, white human beings, they are taking critical race theory as an attack against their identity.
Well, that's the interesting thing about that is a lot of the ways we think and we view things are based on everything we've been indoctrinated in this country. And the reason they think that way is because that's how things were taught in the United States. Because, like you said, they can see black as a race or Asian as a race, and they see themselves as human. Well, that's what the law used to say. That's exactly what the law used to say. The law used to say that a white man, and it's, everyone has heard, the 5/8 of a man and stuff dealing with slavery. No, let's go more recent. Let's go to 1911, the Naturalization and Immigration Act of 1911. It spent the majority of the first 2 pages of it defines what a white man is. And you're like, and this is like the 3rd or 4th time the Constitution has done this, and it explicitly defines what a white man is because of what's about to come next. What comes next is what an Asian man is, what a Chinese man is, and what a Japanese man is, because they're about to ban them from being able to become naturalized citizens. And first you have to establish who has rights. Then you have to establish who isn't in this group. And everybody not in this group, to see, because what they don't do is they don't say, well, you know what, black people don't have rights. It doesn't explicitly ever say that.
Right.
It doesn't say Asian people don't have any rights. It doesn't explicitly say that. All these times where we've gone through these different suffrages to get rights, the Constitution never took rights away. what it did is it gave rights to white property owning men. And if you were not them, you were not a full human being. You were not a full citizen. You were something less. Now, so then if it says this white man is a person and they have full rights, what are you? Exactly. And so they thought about this. I mean, they had it. All these things seep in the same way that language does, and we don't think about these things, how these things shape our mindset. But to me, it's like this. When I tell people it's impossible to have grown up in the United States of America and racism and race not affected how you see and deal with things, because it's like this. We don't hear our own accents. But when if we go to England, they hear a very harsh American accent, whether it's Southern, whether it's New York, they hear it. We don't hear our own accents. We don't know our own racism because we don't know anything else but that. It's natural. This is how you think about things. So you're not conscious of it. But other people are very conscious of it. We can hear a British accent the same way that they can hear ours. We don't think about our own racism because it's natural. It's like our accent. It's every day.
And what was that document you referred to that defined those different categories?
That was the United States Constitution Naturalization Act of 1911. In 1911, they specifically banned Asians from being able to become naturalized citizens. No more could come into the country and seek citizenship. Those who were not already almost through the process of getting citizenship could not become citizens. And then that left a lot of people in limbo, because you had a lot of people from Japan that were in Hawaii, and you had this population building up. And what happened was they already got everything they wanted out of them. The Chinese had already helped build the transatlantic railroad. The Japanese had already helped drain Hawaii. And then now that they've done that, what they were doing is they were telling their families, well, now, there's a lot of land here. There's a lot of opportunity, come on in there. It's like, whoa. We let you come here to work.
Right.
Don't be calling over the rest of them over here. We're full. America's full. And that's when they shut the door. They never have done this with Europe, incidentally. So why is all these people talking about come legally? My grandpappy came legal. Yeah, your grandpappy got on a boat, and when he got to Ellis Island, they told him to read a sheet and told him he was an American. There was not a long waiting process. Still to this day, they do it because you have to go through the embassy of your country to get a visa to apply. Well, if you do that in Russia, you go to the U.S. embassy in Russia, it's easy. You go to the U.S. embassy in Manila. Waiting period can be 4 years. You have to know someone that has $3,000 in their bank account. You need to have $3,000 in bank. You have to ask someone about you. That's just to get a visitor visa or work visa. Much less applying for citizenship. Europeans it's an open door for them. There's no such thing as an illegal white immigrant. If you brown or you're yellow or you red, you illegal.
An illegal white immigrant. Wow. Never even thought about that.
In the higher sciences, there's so many, and I was so used to in the physics labs, there's so many Germans and Austrians and stuff, and I was just used to, if I hear someone that does not have a harsh accent, I'm like, wait, somebody new is in here. Who is that? Yeah. There's very few actual just straight Americans in high physics, and I thought about, I was talking to these people all the time about different things in physics and sciences. And it occurred to me one day, say, do you have a visa? And I asked this son, he had been here for 38 years. And he said he doesn't need one because he's white. And I was taken back. I was like, wait, that was a lot of honesty. I wasn't.
Well, you weren't ready for that.
He said I think he just assumed where I was going with it and just cut me off at the chase. He said he came here as a student 38 years ago. He said his student visa expired 32 years ago. His work visa, he never applied for it because once one expires, then you can't do that. You have to do your application before you let it expire. So he said, well, since he had waited too late, he said he wasn't thinking about it. He was all into his studies, and then he got this job, and he said he was being absent-minded. But once he realized that he had messed up, he's like, he was afraid if he left the country, then it would show up that, that he violated the conditions of his first visa, and then he might have a problem getting back. And then, he's got this new job and everything, and his research, and so he just said, well, he talked to another guy. It was Russian. And he said the Russian guy told him, don't worry about it. He said, Russian man said he'd been here for 20 some years. He gets pulled over all the time. He had no problem getting the driver's license. He gets pulled over. And he says, besides not being able to vote, he says, no one cares because you're white.
And see, these examples that you're giving are exactly the object of focus of the concept of critical race theory. Everything you're saying, those are the things that CRT was designed to study. So let's finish out this race piece. You'll see the next slide says race, the myth of race debunked, and you'll see a diagram of people on a scaffold assembling an identity, and it's titled Social Construction, because as you said earlier, Mojo, race is a social construction. Now that word social construction gets bandied about very frequently, but sometimes I wonder if people really know what they are saying, or do they really understand what social construction means. So I put a slide specifically together for that. A social construct is something that exists not in objective reality, but as a result of human interaction. It exists because humans agree that it exists. And that's a pretty heavily loaded description or definition of social construct. And when I say that, I don't mean that it has a moral center, or that it's correct or incorrect, whether it's good or bad. It's just a heavy concept when you think about creating something from the mind of society. And all that's needed to validate it is just a group of people. Just like right now, we've got a significant part of people in our country that validate January 6th. They agree that, it was just some guys getting together, hanging out, expressing their rights. And because enough of them agree, it's not clearly it's not based on objective reality. But that is how easy a social construct can be developed. And there are things there are everyday components, aspects of our society where we use this concept of the social construct in ways that benefit our society. And there are obviously ways that we use it that do not. What are your thoughts on this definition?
It's broad, but it's accurate. It's easy enough to understand, because sometimes I'll put things in a way that it forces me to have to elaborate. I like sometimes you put things more succinct so they can just get it firsthand. But because like an example that everybody either at some point has accepted or known, and then they might abandon it, is etiquette and manners. Social construct. No one said we should be able to walk in and eat any way we want, and don't say hello and do all those things. Etiquette, that's completely a social construct that doesn't benefit it or harm you not to accept them, because a lot of people, once you grow up, it's like, well, my mama didn't hear anymore. I don't have to. I can eat my food with my mouth open. I can do all these things.
I can eat my dessert first.
Yeah, but that was a social construct. Your manners, your etiquette, You know, it was a set of rules that people came together and they agreed that it would be better for our lives. We'd be more civilized.
Yeah, civilized.
If we accept this, because this is how civilized society works.
I love it.
And
I love it. And that's right on money. That's right on point. And so that's what. And here's the thing. And again, this is the purpose of critical race theory, is to examine how this social construct, which we've based many of our systems on, the social construct of race, it's in our applications, it's in our census, it's our political parties, they devise campaigns around this construct. It's in medicine. We have medical professionals who actually base their medical approaches based on this social contract, which has no genetic or scientific validity within a scientific profession of medicine. So it's amazing the impact of this concept. So another aspect in the next slide is whenever we're talking about race, I always like to set the definitions, because in general conversation, people will refer to their own definitions on what they think race is, racism is, or racist is. And when I set these definitions, I tell them, I as I'm going to say now, you don't have to make these your own personal definitions. But for the benefit of this discussion, here's the objective platform definitionally that we'll be operating from. Now, when we're done, you can go back to your own definition if you so choose, or at least that we're not talking about a definition different from this one, if that's what you have, as it pertains to the participant. So, real basic, race is an ideology, the social construct, an ideology of white supremacy. That's basically what race is. A racist is a practitioner of that ideology, one who believes in the ideology of race, identifies in a racial classification, black or white, and maintains the status quo of the ideology, meaning white supremacy. That's what a racist is and does. And then racism is the systemic implementation of that ideology. How do these definitions strike you? Where would you add, detract, make changes at?
They're perfectly fine, operational definitions. I mean, they're a little different than mine, but mine kind of go more in depth, because I got them from a long time ago from a man named Dr. William R. Jones. He was a renowned professor on racism, and I took the theory and dynamics of racism and oppression from the man, and still he passed years ago, but anyone who ever taken one of his classes or talked to him personally, he would have affected your life and how you think about these things forever. Wow. I mean, he was so impactful that when Mandela was still in prison by the clerk, he only was given 2 visitation requests. One was Winnie and one was Dr. Jones.
Really? And you knew this man?
He taught at Florida State University for a long time. That's where I met Headley White. We took his class. We were both in his class in 1990 or 91, probably dating us. But yeah, that was, I mean, people, even white kids were fighting to get into his class. I mean, because the man was just so brilliant that it was something. But his definitions, they also included some others, that it's a hierarchy. He has, there's racism, there's a racist, and there's a racialist, which is like a racist without the power.
Interesting.
And
I like that.
Then there's ethnocentrism, which is someone that is really very extremely proud and loves their own race, but they don't feel that any other race is inferior.
Okay.
But for functional use, because the definitions I use always make sure that that part about power
Yes,
is
it's
is
clarified.
in it. Because if you can be a bigot and prejudiced, but you don't have any power, you're not affecting anybody's life. You're not a racist.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You just bigot. You're just a bigot.
Yeah, I mean, for somebody, a lot of people like analogies. It's the analogy is like this difference between a racist having to deal with a racist and having to deal with a racialist having to deal with a regular bigot. Okay, you have this nice $400,000 house you bought in this neighborhood, right? You
Mm-hmm.
move to your house. Okay, some people in that neighborhood don't like you. Okay, having the people that are in the homeowners association not like you, that's what it's like dealing with a racist, because they got power and they can make your life miserable.
Love it. Great analogy.
Now, a racialist is having your neighbor that has a house just like yours and they don't like you. So what? they can't take your house. They can't make you leave. They have a house. You have a house. They just don't like you. That's dealing with a racialist. Dealing with a bigot is somebody walking through the neighborhood don't even have a house. They don't like you. So it doesn't affect you at all. There's levels to these things.
Your delivery, man. Your delivery. You got me crying, man. You got me crying right now.
I have to illustrate things, some help people out and make it a little more interesting.
Oh, that's an invaluable skill set you have there, brother. Because I mean, that delivery is just, it says so much, and you don't have to use a lot of words, man. But it proves the point. Oh man, so let's move to the next but I do have to say, this is why I enjoy doing this work, and I always approach this from I don't impose my approach or my perspectives on people, because if I did, I would not be able to learn. You've already exposed me to several things here that I was not aware of, and had I said, well, no, this is the definitions, this is it across the board, anybody operating outside of this, you're cracked. That hurts me, because understanding the difference between a racist and a racialist, that's a new way of thinking about this, and I'll be able to use that. That's really important. So into the 5 tenets of critical race theory, I'm going to read these off, and Mojo, I would want you just to give me the Mojo version of what these tenets are saying. Okay, just do you. So tenet number 1. The race is a social construct. Now, you covered this earlier, but go ahead and say anything you want to say to that.
Well,
Now, hold on, Rick. Let me make sure I've introduced this correctly. These are the 5 tenets of critical race theory, not race ideology, which we just got finished discussing. We discussed the ideology itself. Now we're moving into critical race theory, and we're going to talk about the 5 tenets of critical race theory. So, Mojo, number 1, the social construct of race as the number 1 tenet in critical race theory.
Yes, it starts off that race is it's non-scientific, and for anyone that really disputes that, you can pretty much prove that very easily with one thing. Race, that the concept of race began way before we had any understanding of what a gene was. We didn't know what a gene was. We didn't have a good understanding of biology, of even simple biology, when the concept of race came. So we didn't have the means for it to be scientific. The science wouldn't exist to even examine the differences in between people until 300 years after this concept came up. So we know it was a social construct because that's the only thing you had available. So it's not biological. It's just taking characteristics that you can see with your eyes, say, well, that person is darker, so they're different. this person, their eyes are a little bit. It's arbitrary. It's taking these physical characteristics and arbitrarily defining and separating people from a non-scientific, a non-biological standpoint, and calling it race.
Very good. Very good. Number two, the second tenet of critical race theory, the idea of an interest convergence. So I'm going to read the educational version of this, and then I'm going to let Mojo do his thing with the explanation to kind of break it down for the layman. Interest convergence is a theory coined by the late Derek Bell, law professor, spiritual godfather to the field of study known as critical race theory. Interest convergence stipulates that Black people achieve civil rights victories only when white and Black interests converge. Mojo, what say you?
Okay, well, not to rip apart, but there's actually one before that.
Okay.
That's the third. Convergence
okay.
is the third tenet. The second tenet is accepting that racism is not an aberration. It's not the exception. It's the rule.
Okay, so stop right there. Stop right there. So I made that the third. So you're saying that the order of these is important then?
The first is that racism is a social construct and not a biological one. The second one is that racism is not an aberration. That it transcends everything and has been a part of everything in this country since the beginning and the founding of the country.
All right, then let's do that in the correct order then. Let's not do interest convergence yet. Let's go ahead and do the second one, which I put as third. The notion that racism is ordinary and not aberrational. Go ahead.
And I mean, so having that is a building block before you can get to three and what convergence is. And since he mentioned Bell was one of the first black men to get his doctorate of jurisprudence at Harvard Law School. What Bell used, one of the examples he meant convergent was the Plessy versus Ferguson. That he said, well, in this case, you can say, well, okay, this ended segregation, but what was going on with the justices? Why did all of a sudden, because they had ample opportunity to rule against segregation before this in the lower courts, they had years and years. Why was this time a time when they came to do it? And what he found and what he suggested is in between the United States Department of State and the change was World War II. We had black combat veterans that fought and died for this country, and it would have been fine if the Allied powers hadn't seen them. But the Allied powers had seen them. Not only had they seen them, but those black soldiers and Marines, they gained the respect of the British. They gained the respect of the Germans. Then they came back to the United States, and it was just like they were back to being boy and not having equal rights and back into the same struggle that they were in before they went and fought for the country. And what Derek Bell suggested is that it was a horrible image. They didn't want the rest of the world to see that we had these black soldiers and go and fight for this country. Then they came back here and we treated them worse than the Nazis were treating white people. And so he said that there was a series of communications in between the United States Department, between the Pentagon, between the Joint Chiefs, between the justices, that they were saying, well, we have a lot of men that not only have they proved that what they are capable of doing and their combat readiness, but they're leaders in this community. And if we keep treating them the same way, we might have to deal with an uprising. And so we need to do something. And that's what he said, that it was in the best interest of the black community and the white community that didn't want to have to deal with this uprising, didn't want to have to deal with how America looked from treating these vets, that the time it came where it was mutually beneficial. And that's what he means by convergence. It was mutually beneficial for the for African Americans, and it was mutually a bit for the white people that were in power. Now, regular white people, they were not happy, but they weren't empowered to make this decision. And if you did it with the Supreme Court, then you could put it on a few people, and then you could, because there was a kickback when that was made, and especially in the South. So they know implementing it would be different, but that's what he's saying. The time change comes when it's no longer beneficial for only one party. When it's beneficial when it's mutually beneficial, whether the thing is you're talking about is good or bad, change comes when it's mutually beneficial, and not just arbitrarily.
Right.
But like I said, this isn't grade school stuff, because you already something that is difficult, history and law, and then you're analyzing it through this scope. That's how this isn't anything that's taught in secondary school.
Very powerful. Okay, and so I think you kind of covered.
Brown versus Topeka, though, or not, or Plessy Ferguson, although that would come later, but he wouldn't. Yeah, Bell was first talking about Brown versus Topeka. Brown versus Topeka Board of Education.
Got you. And so I think you covered both 2 and 3 in your explanation there. Really, you covered the aberrational component, and then kind of moved into the interest convergence. Correct?
Yeah, well, you have to accept something exists before you go into how it affects things. So you need 2 to get to 3.
Right. All right. So the fourth principle, and I'll see if I'm in correct order here. The idea of storytelling and counter storytelling. Is that the next one that you have in sequence?
It's that one is taught in 2 different ways. Depends on which one you want to do. Sometimes they do the storytelling and counter storytelling is when it's taught from the perspective of the disenfranchised group. They have their culture and their version of the story, and then it's going to be told or disputed by another group. But it is in a more simple form. It's called the racialization component, where there are stereotypes that are applied to races that reinforce race, and whether they are negative, and they usually are negative, that or positive. This racialization of the group, it helps keep this distinguishing factor. So black, and this is where the social construct really comes into play, because these things are usually exhibited or told. There's not just people saying, what, the black folk act like this and Chinese folk act like this. What happens is you will see it played out through the media, through movies, through television.
Mojo's going to come back here in a minute. Mojo, your stuff is so powerful that the airways can't handle your energy, bro. Go ahead, pick up where you left off at.
Yeah, but it's the easiest way to look at that one is basically it's the reinforcement of stereotypes, and also that usually these stereotypes are detrimental, because the simplest one is to say that that African Americans aren't as smart. Then once you have that stereotype, you can see how it can affect everything else. It has a cascading effect that these things, even though they're social constructs, they have a very real
impact
effect on the world.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So let me read this passage on. It's titled "What is Counter Storytelling?" Counter storytelling stems from critical race theory, which began around the mid 1970s. It is defined as a method of telling the stories of those people whose experiences are not often told. So, counter stories can be used to expose, analyze, as well as challenge deeply entrenched narratives, i.e., the stereotypes that you just mentioned, as well as and characterizations of racial privilege, sex, etc. In this sense, counter stories can help promote social justice by putting a human face to the experiences of often marginalized groups. This promotes their sense of social, political, and cultural cohesion and teaches others about their social realities. Now, with that being said, counter stories don't always need to be created in direct response to majoritarian stories. I found this very striking. In fact, some scholars warn that by responding only to a standard story, we let it dominate the discourse. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess I would put that as pick your battles.
Okay. Okay.
Everything is not worth a response because yes, sometimes you give something power
Yes.
by even because I would never forget one of the things my mother would say. She was a British literature and English literature teacher and English teacher, and she kind of had this Claire Huxtable demeanor about it. I was always struck by how she could just shut the whole classroom of high school teenagers and stuff down. And when she just looks, I won't dignify that with a response. That was it. There was no argument.
Shut down.
Yeah, you just okay. I'm low. And it's just like not everything deserves to be dignified with a response.
Well said. Yeah, and that's part of the platform that I try to promote in what I call the work I do racial deconstruction, and that's one of the goals of dealing with those of the Black identity is being less reactive. I like your term, pick your battles. You don't have to swing at everything because when you're in constant reaction and response mode, you're playing their game rather than creating yours for them to respond to. So that's kind of part of the element. So you summed it up very nicely. The last tenet, the notion that whites have actually been recipients of civil rights legislation. That contains so much irony, just the concept of that. Speak on that.
Okay, well, the fifth tenet is intersectionality.
Okay.
And what intersectionality says is basically no one is a monolith. That you might be Black, you might also be a woman, you might also be a lesbian woman. So now you're a member of three different groups. So you have a vested interest in more than one group. So that when you're looking at these things, you have to look at the entire person and how they interlock and see, like affirmative action. If you look at affirmative action, well, they'll say, well, we got these quotas and it let all these benefit all these Black folk, but anybody that knows anything about affirmative action knows that, like you just said, that benefited from white women received the majority of those contracts. White women benefited from affirmative action far more than minorities as a whole, more than Black women and Black men combined. So because it was written and said, well, they were a minority, and it's how it defined.
How you define it? Yes.
They didn't mean they were a minority in the population, because they're not. They're the biggest population. They're a minority in the business world. They were minority in the collegiate world at the time. So what it's saying is underrepresented. That's how they define. They were defining minority as underrepresented. And so if you have and interestingly enough, affirmative action wasn't created in the public sector first. It was created in the military first. The military had already implemented every aspect of affirmative action 15 years before the private sector have even heard of it. And because they were dealing with, a morale problem.
Interesting.
Once you had more and more, after we got into these conflicts and we finally started allowing the black troops in, and you had more and more, especially since we were still dealing with drafts. We didn't stop drafting people until after I was born. So, I'm glad I was a baby, but we were still, we drafted World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. We were still drafting people. So at the time when they implemented this, we had some people that they stayed in the military. Matter of fact, with black people, that they found out that what they could do is they could get out of enlisted, then go and join the National Guard and the reserves as an officer. They could use the GI Bill to go to college, then be an officer, then recommit in the same branch, but now they were a commissioned officer instead of an NCO.
Wow.
And you had this whole influx of well, dang, they found a loophole. And they was like, well, we wasn't planning on all these black colored officers. We need commands. And let black people have a command. Well, you got black colonels. What you gonna do with them? Especially in peacetime. Well, we got some black platoons over here where you can't have them babysitting the black people, because you have an entire influx of not just black soldiers, black Marines. You have black commissioned officers.
Wow.
Because you had a system that was colorblind, that only racism prevented people from going up in there. So once you struck down the racism with the Uniform Code of Law, that opened the ceiling. Once the ceiling was open, now you had some people that you didn't have a job for. You didn't have a MOS for, because you never knew it was going to be any. So the deal and the way the military deals with things is kind of how. That's why they heard the general from Joint Chiefs addressing Congress about critical race theory. He said he liked it because that's how the military does it. The military studies everything before they implement anything.
That's right. Before
they implement anything. And this is a way of studying before implementation and analyzing after implementation.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. It's a way of analyzing something.
It's mission oriented, mission centered. Yeah. Well done. Good, man. You're walking around with this information and just in your head, man. You just grabbing stuff off the top of your head like this, man. Really?
I have an IQ over 190. I have to do research and stuff just randomly, because it's like OCD. If I hear something and I don't know about it, it'll drive me crazy if I don't research. I'll be lying in bed like, well, what does that mean?
Wow. Amazing. Yeah, amazing. I mean, you've blown my mind on several levels this evening in this discussion, man. So we're getting to here close to the time to end, and we've really only got just a taste of how deep critical race theory is. So just in the last couple of minutes of this discussion, I want to leave everybody with this concept to meditate, or this question to meditate on. And I do believe we'll probably do a second part with me and Mojo on this piece. So I'm going to drop this, and then I'm going to let Mojo kind of close it out with any last words that he wants people to think about before we get to part 2. What I want you all, viewers, listeners, watchers, to meditate on is this question. From everything you've learned this evening, what is the difference between race ideology and critical race theory. And it's important to know that in order to have an intelligent and productive discussion in future situations when dealing with sensible people or irrational people on the critical race theory mania. So one more time, your question to meditate on before we get to next week's part 2. What is the difference between race ideology and critical race theory? Mojo, I'm gonna let you take it out with some last words, mic drops, whatever you might have for people to think about tonight.
Well, I'll just to sum up, basically, what critical race theory is it's just a tool, because the history is out there, the law is out there, all of these things are out there, and it's a tool to look at things in a perspective that you might not look at it in another way. You might not have looked at Plessy versus Ferguson or the Second Amendment in a manner of, well, why is it like this? How did it get this way? And critical race theory makes you research it a little more in depth and see something that's affecting your life today that was written 110 years ago. Is it even still valid today? So it's just a tool, and I mean, and without anything to work on, without the history, without the laws themselves, it's just like any other tool. A hammer without wood is just a piece of metal sitting in a drawer.
There it is. There it is. Boy, you must be from the country.
I'm a master carpenter. I'm from the country.
All right, boy. All right. Well, this has been a great discussion, Mojo. I have to say, of all the discussions we've had, this one has been the most thoroughly enjoyable. You have taught me a lot tonight, and I really, really appreciate that. You've taught all of us a lot this evening, just with your wealth of knowledge, and just I love the delivery. I love the way you cut through all the BS, man, and you just get right to it. And not only do I hear your answer, but you tell it in such a way that I feel your answer. So thank you, brother. Excellent job.
Thank you.
This has been a great discussion, another episode of Black Space Live. I'm George Middleton, and you have experienced the great Mojo. Thanks for hanging out. And then until the next time, we'll see you on the other side.
Out to the people.